It's another episode of Film Streak, and man, this, I've been saying it for the last few episodes, but this has been a really weird and interesting and eventful summer of 2025. It's just been a lot going on. The episodes have been a little bit up and down, but, I've tried to kind of keep with watching films. And part of my summer, at least for this year, is got hit with COVID again. And, there's a point where you kind of think, oh, we're maybe done with this, like this isn't really a thing anymore. And yet it snuck up on me, I feel like things have relaxed so much that we kind of forget like certain precautions and things we have to consider and all that. And it just happened. And so I was down for about a week with it. Nothing too serious, but it was still a thing that, oh yeah, it kind of reminded me, like that's where this whole thing started. 2022, at the end of 21, I came down with COVID and I started the new year watching a new film every day. And that's kind of how this whole thing got going. And so I took this time over the summer to watch a ton of movies. I mean, I actually just went on a run, right? I went on a real run of watching a lot of movies from the 80s that are, I don't know if you want to say inspired by Friday the 13th or Halloween, the sort of slasher summer camp type of movies, or the serial killer, the kind of, I want to say like B or C grade horror films that really turned into a thing. Like it was a whole wave in the late 70s into like the mid 80s. And, I thought I had seen a lot of these over the years, but it turns out I really kind of stuck to like the big franchises, I kind of went to all the chain restaurants. I didn't really check out all the greasy spoons around the corner. And so these were the films that I kind of had heard of. And maybe a few of them I'd seen before, but it was so long ago I really didn't even remember them. But I kind of went down this hole of just watching all these films. And look, there are so many here that I just have to run down them by title. And I'll talk about whatever I can remember at this point. I was a little bit of a NyQuil-induced hazed as I watched some of these. So I may or may not be totally clear on all of them, but we can start with The Burning, The House on Sorority Row, Prom Night, Alice Sweet Alice, The Prowler, The Funhouse. There's a lot of those, The Final Terror, The New York Ripper, The Driller Killer, The Prey, Humanoids from the Deep, Sleepaway Camp, Body Count, Madhouse, Slumber Party Massacre, which I feel like I might have seen. Turns out I really remembered Slumber Party Massacre II, mostly because of how bad it is. But there are a couple others here. The Toolbox Murders, which I remember seeing maybe like in the early 90s or late 80s maybe, and I was probably not really at the right age to see a movie like that, but watching it now kind of hit me in a different way. Let's see what else here. American Gothic, Motel Hell, Road Games, which is an interesting type of film. It's not really in line with some of these others, but I do remember seeing that on TV and thinking, oh wow, this is a really kind of terrifying type of story and a way of telling a story. Watching it now, all these years later, it doesn't really hit the same. It doesn't really feel that terrifying as I saw it back then. A lot of these films are, as I talked about in an episode a while back, talking about giallo and the whole genre, the type of story that those Italian films created, where you've got either a masked or a mystery killer who is taking out a group of characters one by one. And sometimes it's bloody, sometimes it's really creative. A lot of times there's kind of sort of a devious nature to it. And a lot of these films do work that way, right? Where we don't know who the killer is, but it's one of a group of people, or it's somebody who's like looking for revenge or looking to teach all these people a lesson or whatever. You know, as a whole, this is a whole lane of horror films. I mean, even up to Saw and those types of films, that it's about somebody exacting some sort of justice or some sort of motive on a group of people who either don't know each other or do know each other, and they suspect each other, right? So, you know, some of these films, they are kind of dancing around the whole like teenage, high school, college age set, the younger people, the youth. And, you know, you could look and say, well, as a whole, maybe all of these films, these types of stories, they're saying something about the nature of youth and the nature of whether it's like fear of the greater world or fear of growing up, or like the horrors that reality can bring upon you, right? Like I'm sure there's like stuff in these films that relates to that. Others films here, I mean, sometimes it's like just an excuse to just get violent and get some naked girls on screen. I honestly, right? Like you can't really fight that with some of these. I can tell you the ones that I think really stuck out to me, I think were the Prowler, because I feel like it was trying to say some things related to, I don't want to say like city life, like living in the city, because a lot of these other films are about like people out in wilderness or like at camp, right? Or just in a place where it's kind of remote and isolated. And, you know, I think especially if you do live in a city or you grew up in the urban environment, let's say, and you go out to a place where it's kind of remote, and there is that sort of creeping sense of like, wait, what is out here with me, right? But when you have a film that goes the other direction, where you've got things that are happening in the city or in a place where there are people everywhere, and so these horrors, they can kind of like go unnoticed by people around you, but it's something that you feel like, well, why is the monster only chasing me? And so some of these films kind of work in that territory. You know, The Prowler, I think, does that. The Toolbox Murders does that. Let me think here. What else? The New York Ripper, of course. That's a film that it's maybe more of a crime thriller, right? Because you've got police involved and sort of solving the mystery. It's not just a bunch of people getting preyed on. But it's also, it's directed by Lucio Fulci, who is a part of the giallo genre, the wave. You know, he's one of the filmmakers that really kicked this thing off. And so for him to kind of take his own, no pun, stab at this American sort of variant of these stories, I thought it was kind of interesting. You know, it's pretty dark and it's kind of gruesome in some ways, but I think it actually is an interesting like middle ground. Like it's not quite like into American teenage slasher films, and it's not quite Italian giallo style horror thrillers. It's somewhere in the middle. I don't know where the line is exactly, but it's an interesting sort of experiment. The other one that I thought was kind of interesting in terms of the filmmaker, let me see. I think it was Body Count. Yeah, it was Body Count. This is one that's directed by Ruggero Deodato, which, you know, if anybody recognizes the name, if I said it right, he's a director of Cannibal Holocaust, which is, you know, if you know horror films, that's one of those that it's a tough watch and it's kind of disturbing in its sort of graphic nature and even the subject matter. And it's one of those that I feel like this is a dangerous film. This is a dangerous filmmaker, right? Here's someone who is probably very irresponsible in the type of film they're making. And Body Count, I can't say it's a good film. I didn't really, a matter of fact, I really kind of just didn't enjoy it at all. But you can kind of see the same sort of sensibility of like there's a real cold kind of disregard for humanity in the type of the way that the film plays out. It's just not up to quality, and it doesn't really have the gimmick of like the found footage thing that Cannibal Holocaust did, and the sort of story within a story. Like it's just much more plain and direct, and when you kind of lose those aspects, it just feels kind of boring. Let's see a couple of others here that are to remark. Some of these honestly I can't really remember much of. Alice, Sweet Alice, I thought was interesting because it's a film about a young girl, and one of the things that I think retroactively it was like a selling point is like this is Brooke Shields' first film, and she's like 8 years old in the film. So I'm like, okay, well, is she really the star of the film? Like, is she the killer or what? I didn't get it. And the film kind of tries to do that for a minute. And then you realize like, wait, oh, Brooke Shields as a child is not in the film for maybe more than 15 minutes. And then it's about this mother trying to understand what happened because the sister is also involved in part of this. And the sister, who's also a child, is maybe a suspect, maybe troubled. And then there's like the whole idea of there's this layer of Catholicism that's kind of hanging around the story with the church and the priest and who is involved with this child and their parents and their life. And there's the divorce, the broken couple. They're trying to deal with the loss of their daughter and their other daughter. And there's a lot of little pieces in here. It kind of feels very like TV movie-ish. It does feel like it's very much like stuck in 1976. Like it feels like a movie from that time, and it really doesn't lean towards anything that looks even remotely modern. It looks like an old type of film. And even some of the acting, some of the writing, it just feels very antiquated. I just thought it was a really interesting experiment, though, because you've got this idea of like the child villain. And it doesn't really turn out to be that, but that's kind of where it leads you for a good part of the film. And then, of course, it leads you into a weirder place by the end. But the idea that, oh, the child is the killer, like I imagine that's not something you probably saw in a lot of films. Now, it also kind of seems like this was either inspired by or it was sort of spun off of the success of The Exorcist, right? You've got this little girl in the middle of the film who is possessed and doing all these things and horrifying people around her. And this kind of feels like it's trying to play off of that. It doesn't really work, though. A couple of others that I thought were at least sort of remarkable. The Burning, which was the first one I saw here, and it really kind of got me on this roll where it is kind of Friday the 13th, you know? It is sort of like, oh, let's just play with this same idea, but we've got a different setup. We've got different types of characters. It's a summer camp kind of thing. And I feel like all of these actors are like way too old to be playing the characters they're playing, but it's an interesting sort of look. I mean, you've got people who now are in their, I don't know, 50s or 60s in this film. And so in 1981, when this came out, you could say, well, they were kids back then, but nah, they still look too old to be like teenagers. But it is kind of a very similar thing to Friday the 13th. There is the title, it kind of indicates like there is a tragic thing that happens in the film that starts it all. And you know, kind of use your imagination. Basically, someone gets burned and they come back for revenge and start taking out all these campers. Another one that I thought, okay, you know what? Here's one that kind of surprised me because I I felt like I might have seen it, but as I was watching it, I'm like, no, this doesn't look familiar, even though the title sounded familiar. Is Sleepaway Camp. And that's one that is also like takes place at a camp. You've got a bunch of kids or teenagers, and you've kind of got the groups. And there's this girl who comes to the camp, and but she doesn't talk. She's not mute, but she just chooses not to talk because of some traumatic thing that happened to her that we see at the beginning of the film, where when she's a much younger child, there's an accident, like a boating accident or whatever, and it clearly like it affected her. And so now, as a little bit older, as like a teenager, she's at this camp and she's getting the teasing, she's getting the like questions and the strange looks, like what's wrong with her? This girl is weird. She doesn't talk. What's she about? Who is she? And as the film goes on, you see other characters try to like reach out and try to either bring her into the group or like just to get to understand like what's going on here. And you know, by the time the film ends, there's like a pretty big secret she's been keeping the entire time, because people start to like bully her and tease her and make fun of her, and those things start happening to them. But eventually all the fingers start to point to this girl, Angela, and like, is she at the center of this? Does this have something to do with her? And then by the end of the film, we find out, oh yeah, got a big secret you're hanging on to, huh? You just been holding out. And it turns out she's not who she says she is. She's not even what she says she is. Oh, cool. All right. So that was an interesting kind of twist on I guess the genre, but also the expectations of going into this kind of film. A couple of others. Let me think here. I'll tell you what, I could even say like the ones that I thought were pretty rough, pretty tough watches. The Driller Killer, which is directed by Abel Ferrara, who, you know, I know from films later on in his filmography, like I guess the 90s, let's say, but this film, it's not really in the same lane. It's about a man who is a musician or trying to be a musician, and to my ears, not really very good. And so, and Abel Ferrara plays the main character here, and his thing is he's trying to make it as a musician, and eventually gets frustrated and pushed around enough where he pulls out this drill and he starts going after people. And I don't know. It's an interesting sort of it's an alternate angle to take in this sort of genre. I don't know that it really holds up, because one, it's the quality. The filmmaking itself is really rough. The acting is not great. Even some of the the special effects or whatever, the kills, they're obviously like kind of, they're limited, they're restricted by what was possible or maybe budget or whatever. So it's not great. It just doesn't come off great. Maybe it's more of a curiosity, especially if you're a fan of Abel Ferrara and the types of films that he's done, the types of stories he tells. But I think as a standalone, as a horror film, I don't know if I really put it there. I don't know if it really works like that. Let's see what else here. Some of these, they're so rough. Humanoids from the Deep. That was really strange because it kind of seemed like it was a similar thing. It was like about somebody that's killing these people in this small town, and turns out, it's actually some sort of creature, and the creatures are basically coming up out of the ocean or out of the water, and they're just like assaulting women. And that's one of the things, it's like there's a limit to where it's like, this is kind of interesting or even funny or whatever, or I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but here it's like it just becomes kind of I don't know. It goes past any of those things where there's like a value to it. It becomes kind of just disturbing. And the fact that it's done so poorly, just in terms of the filmmaking and stuff, it just seems like, yeah, I don't know what you were thinking. I don't know what you were on putting this together. And so something like that, I just feel like, okay, well, that's not really in the lane, but it's of the era. You know, all these films that I saw here, let's see, we're going from 1976 with Alice Sweet Alice, all the way to the last film that I saw, which was, or put it this way, the last release, 1987 American Gothic, which, you know, look, it's got Rod Steiger in it. It's like, you know, a known and maybe prestigious Hollywood actor in this. It kind of just feels like a cable TV horror movie. Like, I don't know if this was actually like a film that was in theaters, or maybe it was like a HBO or Showtime kind of thing back in the day. But, you know, the idea here is that this is a play on it's like an iconic painting from, what's the artist, Grant Wood. It's from many years ago. I want to say it was like the 20s or 30s or something. And, you know, it's the man and the woman, and he's holding the pitchfork, and she kind of looks like, I don't know, perturbed or annoyed. And they're standing in front of like a farmhouse or like a ranch or something. And, you know, the idea is that it's commenting on some things, especially about like rural America and the sort of attitudes and the sensibility of those times and that culture, right? So there's something there to the art itself. The film, I guess it's trying to like play off of that, of like the sort of quiet, sort of unspoken horror of rural America, especially small rural towns and villages, right? Like there's just something that's, in one sense, it can feel quaint and it can feel sort of idyllic. But on the other hand, like if you just kind of lean over to the side and squint a little bit, like you could see like, nah, there's something else going on here. Like there's something dark involved. And like I said earlier, it's like, I feel like that's if you come from like city life or whatever. Like it just seems so foreign and suspicious if you look at it just the wrong way. And I guess this film is kind of playing on that, trying to like extrapolate a lot of stuff out of a painting. And meanwhile, it's not that great of a film. It's not scary. It's not really suspenseful, which I think it's really supposed to be. I get the idea. I think I see the vision, like what it was going for, but I just don't really think it gets there. And so, you know, that's why I say, like a lot of these, I feel like they had ideas in them and they tried to like do what they could, but the success rate is just really, really tough. And so a lot of these films, you know, I think where it came down to for me was like, okay, well, just how inventive did they get? At least like give me some films that show, for what they are, for horror films, show me some people dying in some really creative and gnarly ways. And that's where I think the Prowler probably works, because maybe of most of these films or all of these films, that's probably the one that the kills look the most like what I would imagine are realistic, if that's the way to put it. Like the way the special effects were done, or the makeup, or whatever, the camera work, it just looked like, oh wait, how did they do that without actually hurting somebody? There's something about like the convincingness of how they do some of this. And of course it's all filmmaking, it's all illusion, it's all a magic trick. But the more successful the magic trick, I guess the more entertaining it is, even if it's watching somebody getting their eyeballs ripped out or whatever, right? And some of these films work in that way, at least. Others, not so much. They're really kind of, they're not playing it for that. They're playing it more for the camp factor or the comedy factor. Something like Slumber Party Massacre II, which it goes totally in the other direction. It is basically following the same format, but it is more like the sort of rock and roll hair metal version of it, where it's like, oh, I can't really take any of this serious, I guess, then. Like, this is all being played for a joke. And you could see that even happened in the sort of more mainstream like franchises, like Nightmare on Elm Street certainly went that way. The first film or a few films, well, specifically the first Nightmare on Elm Street, was really scary in terms of like you didn't know what exactly Freddy was. You didn't know the sort of legend behind it. It was all kind of being introduced and unwrapped by the characters. By the time you get to the third film, it is kind of a rock and roll circus. And then as it kept going, it's like, oh, Freddy has like one-liners now. He's got jokes. And the kills, the sort of part where he goes after people, it becomes like just a carnival. And, Friday the 13th kind of started to go in that direction. And I think they managed to like sort of swing it back the other way. But, and Halloween, I guess, I don't know. It's been reinvented so many times now. I don't even know where that really stands. But you could see those franchises even. They didn't really stick to the, like, let's keep it dark. Let's keep it scary. Let's keep it mysterious. Like, they just brought it out into the daylight. And then you kind of see like, oh, this isn't actually that scary. Some of these films kind of do that. Some of them don't. Some of these do stay in the shadows and they do stay a little bit weird and creepy. Something like Motel Hell, which it's kind of an interesting premise, but the way that the characters in this film, it's kind of like a family of characters. They take in these people into this motel, and turns out they're actually like abducting these people and they're like farming them. And like literally like planting these people in the ground with just their heads above the dirt. And they're like harvesting them. And so there's kind of a weird, disturbing sort of visual thing that happens with that when you actually see that being done on camera. It's just a very off-putting kind of image. And so, some of those are at least effective and like, it's kind of weird, it's kind of absurd, but it is still kind of scary though, right? Like the idea of this. So some of these films, I think at least work on that level. None of them are particularly great. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I probably wouldn't put any of these above a 5. The last one I'll talk about here is Road Games, which I mentioned earlier, but that was one that I really thought, I remember seeing it as a kid on TV and at the time thinking, oh, this is strange because it's like a horror movie where you don't know who the killer is, but the character who's played by Stacy Keach here, he's a truck driver, and he's on the road and he picks up people along the way. And, we're talking about the 80s. So I guess it was different attitude towards hitchhiking and, picking up strangers, whatever. But also he's in Australia and he's crossing, I guess it's like the outback. He's like just on this like 1,000-mile journey. And he's like, I got nothing else to do. So a lot of the film is actually him kind of narrating to himself what is happening or what he's thinking or what he should do or whatever. And in that way, it kind of reminded me of something like Rear Window, where you have a character who's kind of by himself, and yet he's seeing things and he's having thoughts and he's debating things like, should I do this? Should I do that? What is this? What's happening now? So he's narrating to himself, of course, to us, but it's a way for the character to kind of try and understand like what's happening around him. Sort of like you have in Rear Window, where you have this character who's just watching all the neighbors across the way in the building and curious, but also confused, but also horrified by some things that he sees or thinks that he sees. And in this film, you kind of have the same thing. He's this driver who ends up picking up a young woman played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And so they kind of have this banter. And, there's a sense to me where it seemed like, oh, this could have gone in a whole different way. But it really turns out like, no, these are just two people just in the same vehicle going in the same direction. There's not like a love interest thing there. There is like it's maybe more like a father-daughter kind of dynamic of like he's trying to like look out for her, and when she goes missing, he's trying to find her, so it kind of detours him from what he was set out to do on his trip. But the idea that a lot of it is confined to this truck that they're in, and their conversation with each other and his own conversation in his own head, it feels kind of claustrophobic in a way. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to play, that there's a person out there that's following us or that's killing people, and we don't know who it is. And it seems like they're kind of like terrorizing us, like they keep seeing this same truck or he keeps seeing the same truck at different places. It's like a van, like a green van or something. And, to me, I remember seeing that as a kid, like on TV, like an edited version of it, and just thinking, oh, this would be so horrifying to know like somebody's out there following you or trying to get you, and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're by yourself. And that all those things are true, of course, but the way the film plays out, there's something also to the like style of the film that I think works. I kind of like the aesthetic of it. Like a lot of it is shot with, I want to say like long lenses, because a lot of it is like on the road, or you see them in the truck, or you get a sense of how big the truck is as they're walking next to it or whatever. There's just something about the way it's shot I like, and I think it works to convey the scope of the story, because in one sense, they're out in the middle of nowhere, and then they're in this big vehicle, which you would think makes them a little bit protected. And yet at the same time, once you kind of get inside the cab of the truck, it feels kind of claustrophobic, and it feels kind of like they're trapped. And whether that's trapped in the truck or they're trapped like within their own sort of minds of the paranoia and the fear or the confusion, I think it kind of works. Now, I'll say that as an adult watching it now, it's not the same kind of scariness. It's a different kind of thing. I might have seen this film when I was like 10 years old or something. But watching it now, all these years later, it's like I see it on a different level, and it's not as horrifying, but I get this sense of like, oh, this is what they were trying to do. Even if some of the dialogue is a little bit kind of corny and it doesn't really, it seems like there are moments where it takes itself a little too seriously. And so, that's one that I wanted to watch, mostly to kind of refresh myself and see if I still saw the same things. And I didn't. I actually saw some different things in it. But I like the idea of it, like this kind of like moving horror film. Like it's just on the road. I feel like there's a couple of other films over the years that have tried to kind of work in that lane too. But, something like, was it Joyride? That came out like, I don't know, like 20 years ago with, was it Paul Walker and, Steve Zahn? I think that's who was in it with him, right? Where they're the two guys that are in the car. They've got the girlfriend, and they're like on the road, but there's this trucker that's like kind of harassing them over the radio, and then starts following them, then like stalking them, trying to kill them. So it's kind of a similar thing to that, maybe. So anyway, I mean, look, this is a ton of films. This is, what is this? Almost 20 films. This is probably the most films I've ever done in an episode. And I can't talk about all of these in any great detail at this point. But I did watch them all, I promise. And some of them I was in more of a state of focus than others, but it kind of gave me a different perspective on what I thought these horror films of the 80s were. And of course, these aren't all of them. Like, there are no real aliens or supernatural things going on in these films. Most of these are like the slasher variety. So, I don't know. Maybe there's another episode in the future where I can explore some other sort of angles to horror films. You know, part of the thing that occurred to me is like, I'm watching all these films and I'm looking at the cover art, you know, the whatever on like Netflix or HBO Max or whatever, actually, I take it back. I saw most of these films on Amazon Prime because they have like a pretty deep catalog of some of these 80s horror films. Also, Tubi and Pluto, which are the free streaming services. You know, you throw in a few commercials or whatever. But then again, so does Amazon Prime at this point, so commercials are going to be there. But the idea is like you can see these films like entirely now. Like in the past, like when these came out on television in the 80s or 90s or whatever, you had to see them edited. You had to see them with like big portions removed probably. And so here you can at least see the entire film, maybe with a few commercial breaks or whatever, but still, like, you're getting the actual film as it was originally made. And in some of these films, maybe it's worth it, and others, maybe it's not. But my thing was like, you know what? I remember being in the video store in late 80s or early 90s and walking through the horror aisles and like, oh, seen that, haven't seen that one. And what is that? Like the cover just alone, I'm like, what am I looking at? Like, what is the film that's in that? And so here was a chance for me, I guess, personally. It's just like, oh, here are all the films I either didn't see, didn't want to see, or didn't even know about. And let's go. Let's see what's up. So, I don't know. I'm sure there are plenty of other genres and types of films and eras of films that I could do that with. This is just the one that kind of hit during the summer and then kind of kept going as I stuck it out with COVID for a while. So anyway, maybe some of these appeal, maybe they don't, but this is what my summer has been so far. So, hey, it's a summer, bloody summer, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, that's it for me for now. I will be gone for a little bit, and I'll come back with another episode with some more stuff later. So until then, filmstreak.com. Go find some other episodes if you like. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. You know what to do. Go watch something new.